Welcome in, everybody. I'm your host today, Clayton Gullett, and welcome to the first episode of Executive Sessions. I am joined today with two beautiful guests of mine, Mr. John Stewart to my right and Mr. Scott Duncan to my left. Welcome to the very first episode, and a very momentous moment this is. Today we will be covering industrial manufacturing. Hopefully we'll be the best of the best. There is no question we will be the best of the best because of these two gentlemen right here. To our right, John Stewart, the senior. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Man. And then to our left, we've got Scott Duncan.
Hello, Clayton. How are you?
I'm doing good. Doing all right. So today, the main focus that we'll be kind of looking into is kind of understanding who these two gentlemen are, what they have built around them. This room, for example, is a prime example. Very top of the line, and they've built an empire that is ever climbing and ever growing around them as well. But nobody knows yourself better than you. So to introduce themselves, I'm going to have John go ahead and start out.
Yeah, Clayton. I started my career working on the shop floor at Toyota, just about 15 miles up the road here on the night shift, putting bumpers on cars. And over an 18-year career, I worked through all of the different positions, and I got my undergraduate education. And then got promoted through the system, and I ended my career running Toyota's European operations. And then I moved into private equity 16 years ago. It's hard to believe now that it's been 16 years ago that I moved into private equity, and I went to work for a firm that we'll just call the Prior Firm, that we like to refer to them around here. It was a New York-based private equity firm in 2007, and was there for just a little over 10 years, and brought Scott on board with me after a year there. And Scott and I have worked together for over 20 years. And then in 2017, we left the prior firm and started MiddleGround in 2018 to focus on industrial manufacturing, and something that we know well with our backgrounds coming from Toyota.
Very good. Scott, tell us about you, man.
Sure. So my name's Scott Duncan. I also started my career at Toyota right out of high school. I got the opportunity to work there in the summer. And then I went to the University of Kentucky to get a mechanical engineering degree. And during that time, I worked at Toyota as well. When I graduated, I went back to Toyota. I was there for 13 years. Most of those 13 years, I worked with John in some form or fashion. And so at the end of my time at Toyota, I was just getting ready to move my family to Mississippi when John reached out to me and recruited me to the prior firm. And, I was very happy, A, not to permanently go to Mississippi, but B, to try something different and work in private equity. And I trusted John. We had worked together so well before. So, so when we went to the prior firm, I was in operations at the time. I was a VP in the operations group. So I worked with our portfolio companies. And then, toward the end of our time, I was the director of the operations group. So still reporting to John, but was in charge of every portfolio company basically for that prior firm.
That's awesome. So basically you two, you started out you started out working on an assembly line. You went to college, but somehow both of you met at Toyota. You both worked there, and then you both saw something, I'm assuming, within each other's skills, right?
Yeah, it was golf that brought us together, because the true story is that Scott interned for us, and he was a really good golfer, and so that's why he actually got hired. It's because he was a good golfer, and then he turned out to be a pretty good engineer. But golf is what really brought us together.
Wow. Okay. So do you guys still play today? I'm assuming, or
not as much as we like.
Yeah, not as much as we like. I haven't much lately.
Oh, I got you. Do you guys have a favorite course that's local, or do you travel somewhere specifically? Is there like just a Scott and John spot when you two just need some alone time, or?
No, hey, anytime Scott and John are alone, it's a special moment. We have all kinds of stories. Yeah. We've literally traveled all over the world together, and I think I can order for Scott in just about any restaurant. He'd probably do the same thing for me.
For John.
And we have such a close relationship that we actually got accused of being a couple one time in Boston.
Oh my gosh! All right, well there you go. Is that? Oh, you got something to add?
No,
to that,
no. It actually did happen. And John, of course, said, "Yeah, of course we are," and kind of kept it up because he does that. He likes to play, games like that. But it's funny.
That's fantastic.
And actually, he says we have worked together for a long time.
Right.
And a lot of people assume that means that we're exactly alike in a lot of ways.
Right.
But I think the reason why we work together so well is because we're not alike. We actually see the same kind of end result that we want to get to, and we're on the same page with that. But we're different people, and so I think it's kind of like there's a yin and a yang with us that works pretty well.
That's fantastic. So basically, you've got one who sees the glass, half empty, and then the other one that sees it half full, and then together you guys have a, I guess manufacturing knowledge and the know-how, I guess, to kind of go through it.
Yeah, it's a true bromance in every form of the word.
It's fantastic. Do you guys have an anniversary?
No, I don't. We don't really celebrate an anniversary or anything like that. But when we are alone, we have our special time together.
Yeah, we know way too much about each other, just from traveling around, and we have a whole lot of stories. He's mostly got funnier stories about me, so
well, that's because I don't drink.
I know. I hope those stay in the background today. Just throwing that out there.
Well, I mean, I guess if there's a lull in conversation, we can always kind of go with that. But,
probably not going to happen.
So, okay, well, let's dive in a little bit to this. So you two met. You've clawed your way up. You're working in a management position. Scott comes in. He's a hell of a golfer and wins you over. You guys start working together at Toyota. What inspired you to say, you know what, I'm going to leave Toyota and I think I'm going to pursue something outside of this?
Scott and I worked on a project at Toyota to develop what would be considered a revolution, like in the company. The company had a plan to retool the facility in Georgetown, and they were going to spend tens of millions of dollars to do the project. And we came up with a way to do it cheaper and much more efficient, and ended up being rolled out across like Toyota's plants all over the world. And so we worked together. We actually literally drew it up on a napkin at Outback Steakhouse in Nagoya, Japan. And of all the places that you go in Nagoya, Japan, it's Outback Steakhouse.
Yeah,
but,
I was gonna say.
But anyway, so we drew up the idea and we executed it and always we're successful working together. And I don't think either one of us planned to leave, but things happen in your career, things change. And so then when we had the opportunity to explore other opportunities, the move into private equity, made a lot of sense. And then, once I convinced Scott to come on board with me, we've done a lot of really good things in the 20 plus years that we've been working together.
That's fantastic. You got anything to add?
Sure. Yeah. So, I would say, I was really recruited away by John. I mean, to be fair, he came to my house. He tried to convince me and my wife to make a change. Like I said, we worked together well in different ways. I was ready for a change. I think one thing that if you're in a big company, what you end up finding is you can do a lot of things, but you can't make the type of decisions that you want to make. There's always some corporate they that's making the decisions. And John, he said this is fun because we get to decide what the problems are and what the solutions are, and we get approval and do it, and you can see a whole lot of change real fast. And that's not something that you see a lot at Toyota. It's small incremental improvements, which is great. It's a great company, but this was just different. And I guess there's a different level of autonomy, that we had, and so. That was fun. It's fun to think about and go in and have big impacts on companies. Most of those positive. Not that we're perfect. I mean, we've made our mistakes along the way, but at least we're kind of in control of our destiny a little more than you would be at a big corporation.
Yeah. Scott and I, as long as we've been managing companies together, when we've been managing the board and responsible for managing the board, we've never lost a dollar on an industrial investment. Never.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, so let me ask you both this. So you both have a history at Toyota, and obviously Toyota is a Japanese-based company. What did you learn that you pulled away from that you were like, when we're building middle ground, I want this aspect. I want this part of the culture to be in part of what we have currently because it made such a big impact on me as a person.
Mm-hmm. I would say for me, probably the biggest answer to that is just a culture of continuous improvement. Toyota can be, it's a great place to work, but it can be a very uncomfortable place to work because everything is laid out and you have to explain, every problem that happens and why it happened and what you're going to do about it. I mean, you can't hide any issues there at Toyota, which is good. It's kind of uncomfortable. And then after a project, you sit down and you openly talk about what went wrong and what you're going to do better next time. That's the kind of the culture that Toyota has bred there. And it's one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we brought wherever we went. It's just that culture of continuous improvement. And for a lot of people, it's foreign. And when we might say to somebody, hey, why don't you reflect on that and, write down the list of 3 or 5 things or 10 things that went wrong and what you're going to do about it. I mean, that's foreign to a lot of people to think about doing that. You know what I mean? But it's just something that kind of our brains naturally do now over the course of, being there for 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I think the culture is not one of blame. So like problems happen, like that right. Problem, like I tell every one of our investors, and when we're looking at companies, every one of our models that we underwrite is wrong. Every budget, we're doing budgets right now, they're all wrong. Like none of them are right for any of the companies. There's so many variables that go on, in these businesses. And so, anybody can like take, a company and like forecast it out on an Excel worksheet, but being able to adapt to the problems as they occur, the challenges as they happen, and make those improvements, that's a lot of what we got at the culture at Toyota, because it was not a blame culture. Like problems happen, you solve the problem, and you don't point fingers at people. You don't, try to single anybody out. And, that was a big part of the culture. But even when we worked at Toyota, there was, it was a very close-knit group of us that worked really close together, that did a lot of the projects, and that it was that really close culture, knowing that everybody had your back. Like I know that if I ever get to a point, and it happens a lot, where I feel like overwhelmed, or I feel like there's a lot of things going on, the one person I can rely on to help me with that is going to be Scott, and he'll do whatever he needs to do in order to help me, and I think vice versa. He thinks the same thing about me, and so, that trust, having that trust with one another, not worrying about blaming each other. I mean, we both have like screwed stuff up in our careers, like really bad. It's, like we've made some really bad mistakes and done some things really bad, but we also have the skill set, we can fix it. And so, a lot of times we'll look at the situation and we'll say, well, this is where we are, and there's nothing you can do about it, but what are we going to do now? Like there's no point of blaming anybody or talking about how we got here. It's like we got to fix it now,
right?
And so it's really focused, on that, and that's our relationship's kind of built on that. I would say that we're also very additive to one another. I'm more of a vision, big picture kind of thing, and Scott's more detail oriented and systems and processes, and so I'll come up with like ideas, and then Scott will like figure out like how to do it and make it actually happen. And so we work really good that way, because I rely on him to do that, and he also relies on me to to do what I do. So yeah. it really has helped us throughout our careers.
And occasionally, John is very visionary. Got to give him a lot of credit. He's looking 5-10 years down the road, a lot more than most people. And occasionally, most of what he comes up with is a really good idea. Occasionally, there's an idea that's not that great, and I'll go and study it, and I'll come back to him and explain why and show him, and he's okay with that. He trusts me enough to say, yeah, okay, yeah, that doesn't look right. Let's keep it in the back of our heads and move forward without doing that, but let's remember that and kind of circle back to it if we think there's an opportunity. So that's something that, that he's good about doing as well. One of the things that he talks about, and he's talked about it a lot lately with our portfolio companies, and I think he learned it more from Toyota probably than I did, is that the bigger the problem, the longer the vision. Is that what it is, John? I mean,
longer
do you care
term.
To kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I mean, COVID was a really good example of putting that philosophy to work. So when COVID happened, and people were laying off people, and the economy basically stopped. We made the decision. We had 5 portfolio companies not to lay off any employees, at any of the companies. Now, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what the situation was. We knew that, this was something unprecedented that happened with COVID. The whole global economy was like shutting down. and factories were shutting down. People were concerned, worried about their jobs. They were worried about their futures. And, we were in a good shape. We had managed the company due to Scott and the operations team, really good work. We were in a good shape financially, so we were able to make good decisions. But Toyota always taught us that, the bigger the problem when you're determining what action you're going to take, the bigger the problem, the longer term you think about, what the impact is going to be. And so if it's a small problem, then you can make urgent decisions. But if it's a big problem like COVID, you need to think about the long term, because at the end of the day, that's how people are going to come back and judge you for what you did. And it turned out to be a genius move. We didn't plan it the way that we did, but the federal government ended up putting a $600 supplement into everybody's unemployment, which is $15 an hour. Which it's funny that the government did $600 a week and $15 an hour, because they won't raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Don't get me started on that one. And but then nobody would go back to work because they had the extra money from the government. Well, our people didn't have the extra money because we never laid them off. And so when the demand came back in Q3 of 2020, our companies were in really good position to take volume. And so, it was just, we did the right thing. We did it for the people. We did it for our management teams, so they wouldn't have to focus on trying to lay people off and hiring them back and, do those types of things. But again, it's just where that training and that, philosophy that's been ingrained in us. Scott and I both started there, from early age, and, had that culture, really deep inside of us. And it drives everything that we do.
So the main thing that I kind of take away from listening to you two talk about it is culture is very important to both of you. Communication is very important to both of you. Being able to come back and say, hey, that's a terrible idea, is very important, because you can't always do that. I've worked many jobs where like somebody comes in and they say, hey, I've got this idea, and in the back of your head, you're like, oh my God, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, kind of like that grouper idea.
Yeah, kind of. It's still in the screenwriting stage. But anyway, it's that is so important for people to go through and say, hey, I need a company that understands me, that understands the needs of the people around me. So what is different about the middle ground model than, say, other firms that are in the same field?
Well, I think the main difference is that Scott and I are operators. We don't have finance degrees. We don't have banking backgrounds. We don't come through the traditional way that most people come into the industry. And so, we know how to operate the companies that we're buying. We literally have done between the two of us, we've done every position that there is in the company. And so we know how to execute everything. And that's the differentiation for us, is really with the owner operators at the companies. So whether it's a family owned business that we're buying, that is concerned about who they're going to sell their business to and who's going to be running it and how the employees are going to be treated, knowing that someone that knows operations, that knows plants, that knows the importance of the blue collar mentality, that I think that means something to them, and know it does because they've told us that. And so that's a differentiator. But then also the management teams at our companies. So when they look at our resumes and they look at our backgrounds, they respect the fact that we were people that actually did the things that we're asking them to do. And so we're not just asking them to go do something that we haven't done ourselves. And, I think it provides for a real collaborative relationship, and it helps us with, everything that we do as a firm. But, that's really the basis of everything.
Yeah, we've had people. We had an owner operator who built a business and went through the sale process because of his family situation. He told us that we were not the highest bidder, and he said, "I don't care. I want to sell my company to these guys because I think they're going to be able to operate it better," because he cared about his employees. And I don't know how much money he would be giving up. I'd say it was something pretty significant. Right. But that's what he chose to do. But I agree with John completely. And we've kind of, the operations team inside of the portfolio, it's not just us. John and I don't just make all the decisions. We have a really pretty big inside, staff of people. We're pushing 20 operations people. And a lot of those, I'd say half of those almost maybe have 20 or 30 years of experience in industry.
Wow.
We have 6 automation people now, and I know most of those guys are 20 years in. And we have 3 dedicated ESG people. That's one of the visions that John had early for the firm was ESG. That's I mean, we're trying to say that we're differentiators in that kind of vein as well. But not a lot of private equity firms have that many people that are actual employees. They might hire consulting firms to do most of the work, but we have in-house people. We're actually investing in our team so that they're here and we kind of continue to learn with them.
Oh, so, well, I mean, yeah. So basically, the model that you all are sticking out, you've talked about community being important, leaning into that. Let's talk about, John mentioned COVID. Obviously, if you're alive and you have a pulse, you've heard of COVID. It's been around for 3 years. It's not going away. So when it hit, John, you mentioned that, everybody was being laid off. I was working for a geology institute at the time. I was sent at home. I was sitting at home for 6 months doing paperwork basically, but I didn't know if I was going to have a job or not. I know a lot of the people that I went to school with or were back in my hometown lost work, lost their jobs. So how did MiddleGround somehow figure out? How did they manage this storm, more or less? How were you all able to come out and say, we're not going to lay anybody off, we're not going to cut wages, we're not going to do any of this stuff? How were you able to do that?
Well, one of the things that helps us is because we only do industrial investments, and so we know industrial companies and in the challenges that they face. I think probably better than anyone. And, it's a bold statement, but, there's a lot of teams out there. They'll have an industrial team, but they also, consumer products teams, and they have others. All we do is industrial. So we know the challenges that are facing our companies. We know the challenges that are facing the employees. Having started my career as an hourly employee, if you're making, I started my career making $10.77 an hour. So, when you're at the bottom of the food chain and, every dollar counts. And, it's easy, like right now, there's a lot going on in the finance world and in the tech world where people are just slashing jobs and cutting people. And that's one way. That's one way to do it. It's not the way that we want to do it. Our prior firm, that's the way that they did it. We wanted to do something different. Our motto is we don't want to make money on the backs of other people. And so we don't want to, we think we can make money for our investors and we can still do the right thing and we can treat people well. And we can, instead of shutting plants down, we can build plants and, if we invest in the right companies. And so, when you're faced with something like COVID, first of all, I think it was January of 2020, we actually had our first meeting about COVID because it was the Chinese New Year and we knew that something was going on over there. And we actually had a meeting. We actually had, in February, we had restrictions on our travel and we had already had like PPE and stuff ordered for like our internal people and everything before anybody was even talking about it. And but it was because we were so tied into the supply chain and we knew what was going to happen. And so, we didn't know what was going to happen. We knew that it was going to be very disruptive. And so, then you just take it, one day at a time. And as I already explained, as it unfolded, it was a challenging time for everybody. But, we made the decision, that, we had trouble hiring people in the first quarter in most of our companies. And we thought if we just laid everybody off, that it was going to be real challenging to get everybody back. And so we decided not to do any layoffs. And, we use LinkedIn a lot. We actually announced it on LinkedIn. That we weren't going to do any layoffs. So even if like the government like shut down their facility, we still paid them. We tried to retain all the workers, and we've got a lot of positive comments from the employees at the time. That it was good to have that stability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and prior to doing that, we had a lot of our companies keep a little extra cash on the balance sheet because we knew there would be a lull in production, a lull in revenue, and they might have to have some cash to do what they were doing. And, if able, the employees actually came to work. They showed up at work. Even if we weren't producing, they were making improvements. So there were areas at the shop floor that they were making improvements. They were doing, cleanliness projects. They were doing things where they were kind of making the processes more efficient as they weren't able to produce because we didn't want them to just produce a bunch of inventory. But, they weren't just standing around, getting a paycheck. They were actually making things better for when we started back up.
Well, okay, so you're talking about that. That's fantastic, because I'm sure once everything kind of calmed down, that puts you all in a much better position to kind of get a jump on all of the competition that was around, because people were struggling to pull other people in, and like, oh, well, it's a new industry now. It's a new economy. Like, people are ordering different. So, I mean, that's fantastic. As a result of that, how do you think it's changed the industry?
Well, I think the industry will forever be changed because of the difficulty getting labor into the manufacturing and distribution companies that we own. I think that during COVID, a lot of people went home. A lot of people decided that, their job really wasn't paying much more than the child care and their commuting costs, and they just said, you know what, I think I'm going to just leave the workforce on purpose. They just decided to do that. I think there were others that left, and then companies like Starbucks and McDonald's couldn't get anybody either. They raised their wages to a level where if they did decide to go back to work, it wasn't going to be at that dirty, stinky, loud manufacturing place. They were just going to go to Starbucks or McDonald's, because it was a cleaner, safer job. That's the economy as a whole. So I think the wages that are going to be required to get people in factories, just changed. There was a step change right after COVID, if you ask me. And so that's, one of the reasons why, John announced the $25 by 25 initiative, which we're working toward. But that was, I think that was the impetus of doing that, is just knowing that forever wages are going to be different in manufacturing.
I gotcha. John, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Or
no, look, I think, the biggest things, facing industrial companies today is, a lot of the young people today, they don't want to do manufacturing. And who, some of the plants, to be honest with you, when you walk into them, some of them, who blames them, right? They're really, they're using old technology. Everybody now that's entering the workforce grew up with, iPhones and, all this great technology, and they go in and you're using a press that's from the 1800s, to manufacture a part. And you're like, there's got to be, technology that's better, that we could do this more efficient, right? It just makes sense. But, a lot of these companies have, in especially North America, in Western Europe, a lot of companies underinvested in capital, making capital investments not for a decade, for 30, 40 years. And so, we routinely buy companies that are using technology that's pre-1970 to manufacture their products.
Really? Oh, wow.
Oh, I mean,
most of them.
Most of them.
Oh, wow.
I mean, there's sometimes we have equipment that's 100 years old that's in the facility.
100? Oh, wow. Okay.
So, has there been technology changes in 100 years? Yes. But, the people work off the adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And so, they'll throw labor at it, and that's what gives you low-cost labor, because people fail to innovate and fail to use the technology in the workplace. And so now we've created this perfect storm, situation where the workplace isn't a good place to work. It's not a place where people want to work. The wages are low, and people can earn just as much, saying, do you want churros with that taco, and, these are jobs that you require some skill. And, have someone that started their career in manufacturing, there's a lot of satisfaction to like going to work and actually doing something with your hands and like putting it together.
Right.
And, at the end of the day, knowing that I made so many of these things.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And instead, because like people search for a purpose. And, at Toyota, it was building like a quality car that you knew that people could get in with their families and that they could travel safely. And, every shift we would end with 500 more cars, produced at the end of the shift. And it's something really tangible that you want to make sure that that you have the opportunity to experience that. And so, we're faced with trying to introduce people to that and try to get people to where they'll, take a look at those types of jobs. And so the 25 for 25 is part of our initiative. We want to raise wages and introduce automation, but we also want to improve the facilities. Mm-hmm. Most of these facilities aren't air conditioned or heated. And so in the wintertime, it's cold. In the summertime, it's hot. And if you've ever been to Mississippi in August in an unair conditioned facility, it's not a real nice place to work when you can go sit in an air conditioned Taco Bell or McDonald's and make the same amount of money. And so there's a whole campaign around improving the work environment in these facilities, because we need these products. We need products. We're going to need these products 100 years from now, and someone needs to manufacture the products. And manufacturing jobs are good jobs. They were always carried the country through recessionary periods because they did have good pay, and they were good jobs. And now we've gone to where manufacturing is low pay, considered low skill, and it's because we didn't prioritize and invest in those industries like we needed to. And so that's one of the things that we're focused on doing and that's why there's so much for us to do. That's like why there's never going to be an end to the opportunities that we have with the businesses that we can acquire and that we can work with, because the similar challenges are faced by all of these companies.
So working conditions definitely is the driving point here, because like you're saying, we need materials like this across the United States, across the world. It's not like we're just going to reach a point where we're going to say, well, I guess we don't need that anymore. So you're trying to remain competitive. You're also trying to just do the right thing, which is just give people human conditions to work in, because it's not the 1920s anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Going off of that, what other changes do you think that you all will have to make in order to remain competitive with your portcos?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the working conditions is one of the things that we, it might sound silly, but it's really not silly at all. When we go to our companies, we look at the bathrooms and the cafeterias, and the break areas, because that's where a lot of employees spend a lot of their time.
Right.
Their free time for sure is spent, in cafeterias and break rooms. And sometimes it's like, the conditions just are terrible. And so that's something that we focus our management teams on to improve the conditions there. On the shop floor, I agree with John. A lot of, the air conditioning or, even fans, which,
right.
Can be used successfully in some areas. Some people don't, they don't even provide that, and so we try to make sure that the work condition is better, cleaner, brighter, and that there's no, the environment is good. Some things where we have filters, we put filters in place so the air is not full of contaminants and dust and things like that. So we try to do that. But we're also focusing on the job itself. And so I mentioned the automation team. We have 6 people on the automation team. The job of the automation team is really not to automate for the purpose of losing jobs or getting rid of people.
Right.
The job of the automation team is to make the job more, more successful, just to make the person feel like they're doing more work than just standing at a machine and putting a part in it. Back to what John was talking about, as far as having pride for what you do. A lot of people don't feel a lot of pride when somebody says, "What do you do for a living?" Well, I put this part in this machine.
Right.
What does it happen? And a lot of people don't even know what that goes to and what that ends up being a part of.
Yeah.
They just know that they're putting a part in the machine over and over and over and over every day, and they're standing in the same spot. And probably half the time, they're waiting for that machine to get done. So they're putting a part in the machine and just waiting. And then the machine's done, they take it out, and then they put another one in. That's not, it's not job satisfaction to do something like that. And so our automation is trying to take those tasks and make them more automated so that person can be responsible for a bigger set of machines or a bigger, a bigger part of that part, so that they do feel like they're doing something that is more than just something that can be replaced with automation. So that's what we're focusing on. And we're starting to, get some of those situations into our portfolio companies. Other of our portfolio company management teams are seeing it, and they're excited about it. They're all scrambling, and they're all asking for the automation team to come to them,
Wow.
For those reasons. Yeah, and that's another trend again that we're in front of is, a lot of people are trying to hire automation groups to come in because they can't hire people, and they're doing it for those reasons. But you get 12, 14, 18-month lead times on a project that our team can do in 2 or 3 weeks. And so having our own resources, available to do that, is helpful for us. And that's why we got the 12,000 square foot automation building, and they have all the equipment that they need to design and fabricate, these different types of automated equipment. But Scott said I had some funny stories, and so they're not funny stories; they're actually sad stories. But one of the story is a good example of what Scott was talking about. Is we bought a company one time, and we went up to the plant, and it's a machining facility, so they're machining metal parts, and the floor is just covered with machine oil. So like literally, it was like a roller skating rink. When you go in and you walk on it, like you just slide, your feet would slide everywhere. And the plant management was like, "Oh, well, this is just what a machining facility is like." And I'm like, "I don't know. I've been in 150 machining facilities, and they're not like this. This is not what they're supposed to be like." And so we're walking around the plant. We start looking, and they have a scrubber system in to scrub the air. But they're taking the air from inside the plant. They're supposed to scrub it, and then you're supposed to exhaust it out of the facility, and you're supposed to bring fresh air in. Well, we start talking to the management team, and I noticed that the scrubbers are scrubbing the air, but they're exhausting it back into the plant. And then so I remember I think he was the COO of the company. He's not anymore, but he was like, "Yeah, we can't exhaust that outside because it wouldn't meet the EPA guidelines." And I was like, and it's safe for us to like breathe it,
Right.
And and so then I we were on a plant tour. I gathered everybody together in the cafeteria and told him, I said, "Look, we got to fix this." And his response was, "It'll cost millions of dollars to fix this." I'm like, "I don't care. I don't care if it costs millions of dollars. Like, we're not going to spend another dollar on anything else. Like, you're not going to get any new equipment. You're not going to buy any repair anything. We're not going to do anything until you fix this.
Right.
You're going to fix this problem, like whatever it is." And so we forced them to fix the problem. And so they fixed it. It was like $100,000 for them to fix it.
A little less than millions.
A little less, but now you walk in the facility and there's no oil. There's nothing and so people are been breathing this in, like they've been breathing in their lungs. I mean, it's irresponsible management. We've been in companies where the head of engineering was squeegeeing wastewater into the sewer system, like we just like and I'm like, "Is that good for the environment? Like, is that okay?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, sure it is." And no, it ended up it wasn't. And so there's irresponsible people all in every profession, but it just especially in manufacturing, industrial. I mean, it's people's lives are at stake. People get killed in industrial jobs because people don't have the proper safety equipment, that they're not thinking about the long-term impacts on the employees. And just like that situation where they're exhausting that air back into the plant, it was made for an unsafe work condition. It actually required them to use more machining oil, and so it cost the company more money. And then the people breathing it, from a health standpoint. But they never addressed it, because somebody said it was going to cost millions of dollars to fix it. It took us saying, "I don't care what it costs, you're going to fix it."
Right.
Right. And so, from being someone that was, on the factory floor and now has responsibility to make those kind of decisions, as Scott talked about, like we can decide, hey, we're going to fix that and it's going to get fixed. And, so you can kind of right the wrongs of like what some of these people have done, in some of these companies, for decades even. And some people are so blind about just trying to make money that they don't care how they make it. They don't care at what expense. They don't care, people just become like safety incidents just become a number, and it's not like a real person that's involved with it. Someone gets a hand amputated and people are like, "Oh, no big deal," or whatever. Like, what are you talking about? Someone now can't, they went to work one day and then all of a sudden now they can't use their hand anymore because they got it cut off at work. Like, that's a big deal. Yeah. And so, it's just a shame, that people, have been allowed to operate, this way. Those are the types of things that we're real passionate about. And, there's lots of problems in our companies. We're not able to like fix everything, but we definitely, identify the things that come to our attention and tackle those issues and try to make those things better at each and every one of our companies. And Scott said, like, one of the things I like to do in a factory tour is to go to the bathrooms and look on the shop floor. And it's funny because sometimes when you'll tell them you want to go to the bathroom, "Oh, you shouldn't use that bathroom. You need to use this bathroom." I'm like, no, I want to use the bathroom that everybody uses. right? Because it tells me what you think about your people, right? If you don't care about your people, then like you let the bathroom be all nasty and, disgusting and then, you don't care about the people out on the floor. Like you have a really nice bathroom in the office. Oh, that's nice of you. But like the people on the floor have these like terrible, bathrooms or something, and before we'll like a lot of times we'll have management teams that want to, we want to build this new corporate office and we want to do this. And we're like, well, before we do that, we're going to put in new break areas. We're going to put in new bathrooms. We're going to do, all these things inside the plant and take care of the people that are actually, adding value inside of the company.
And there was a company too where we went to, and the employees on the shop floor physically could not get into the office. The office was locked to them. And we did not like that.
Locked?
It was locked. There was no way. I mean, they could go out and around and come in the front door like any other visitor, but they couldn't come in like every other.
It's because
employee.
the management didn't want them to come up there and bother them with any of their problems.
Yeah. So John told them take every door off every hinge in the office.
Well, that's
and
awesome.
It was done. And guess what? The people in the office, they got used to the people coming in and asking questions, and it was the beginning of them having better communication. But that's the kind of thing. John's very decisive about things like that. And even the company he was talking about with the scrubber system. If you were to go back there now, and there are a lot of problems that we can't fix every problem, but that I think just doing that set in motion those guys thinking about their place differently. It's probably one of the best facilities we have right now. If you went to it, they've got chillers in place, they've got big fans in place, big ass fans in place, and they've got great teamwork now, and maybe that was a part of that. That one change could be something where they thought, let's make this facility better. And the employees started liking it, and it really is just probably one of the showcase plants.
It's one of the best plants, yeah.
Does it ever blow your mind that you walk into a plant? I've never heard of that. I have never heard of walking into a plant and then like the staff literally locking the door and being like, leave us alone, don't come in here. Does it ever?
Just the worst part, it was the human resources manager.
I know.
Are you serious?
Yeah, no, it was the human resources manager. And like we were eating in the cafeteria one day and there were cockroaches, like crawling all over the place where we were eating, and like where everybody was eating. And like,
what?
And so like I like to go into the cafeteria and talk to the employees and ask them what's going on. And so I go to knock on the door because the human resources person during lunch, she'd lock her door so that nobody could come in and like talk to her. And so I knock on the door and she's like, "Who is it?" And I'm like, "It's John Stewart." Oh, she jumps out, and
Mr. Stewart, I'm so sorry.
Exactly. And I'm like, what are you doing in here with the door locked?
Right.
And she's like, I'm just trying to enjoy my lunch. I'm like, well, you don't have to take lunch at the same time everybody on the floor does. They have issues, and we got cockroaches out here, and like I want you to get someone in here and fix it, and and I want you to be available at lunch. I want you to like sit out here at lunch, and if people have questions about their benefits or if they got issues with their health insurance, you can help them. And she resisted, and so the next time I went there, she was in there again, and so that's when I had the doors removed off all the offices, so she couldn't lock herself in the office anymore.
That's wild. Okay, so I heard a story once that you were touring a plant and that your shoe melted.
Yes,
is that
true?
Can you tell that story?
Yeah, so we visited a plant, and again, I'll protect the facility, but it was probably the worst facility I've ever been in, and over 30 years of doing this, and the blatant disregard for the worker safety was just amazing. But it was a steel mill, and so they were making steel, and they had steps that it's common to go across the operation, and first of all, there's no ground in the facility. Like there's no concrete. It was dirt, and
dirt.
Yeah, just dirt, and yeah, and so there was nothing that the stairs were attached to. So like they would shake and everything, but then you get up on top of the stairs and you're kind of observing, and the owner of the company is like, "Oh, we can't stand here too long." I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Because your shoes will melt." And I'm thinking, like, is there something wrong with this? Like,
Your shoes will melt.
yeah, and literally the soles of my shoes started to melt. And so, we almost didn't buy the company, but it's real important to the local economy. It's a good business, but it just had irresponsible owners. And so, we're spending, over $20 million to rebuild the facility, and build the operations the way they need to, with the proper safety, with the proper, maintenance and everything inside the facility. But we see things like that all the time. It infuriates me. Scott will tell you, I get really pissed off about it.
Well, I could imagine.
And but there's a lot of other people that, like, they walk into these, they don't know the difference. They don't know, what should be the case and what shouldn't be the case. And so a lot of that stuff doesn't get addressed. It doesn't get fixed. It's something, I enjoy. I don't get to spend as much time in the factories as I would like, but I enjoy being in the factories and interacting with the people and talking with the people at the plant, because they'll tell you what's really going on, in the company. And so you can find out what's going on. And at the end of the day, they're the ones adding the real value in the company. And so, that's some things that we do different. When we buy a company, we go to every facility, we talk to every employee, we explain to them, what we're trying to do, and try to get them on board with what we're doing. And then we align everybody's incentives. So, Scott talked about the 25 for 25 program, but one of the other things we did is we pegged our CEO comp to the lowest wage person. And so, if the CEO earns like all of his bonus, but that gap gets larger between him and the lowest wage person, he doesn't get all of his bonus. So, like, you got to advance pay, inside the organization in order for you to achieve things. And that's, it's a check and balance to make sure that, the senior management team aren't, making, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're doing it at the expense of the people that are working on the shop floor.
Yeah.
And so just making sure we have those checks and balances in place. We talk about all these things, and it sounds counterproductive to, like, trying to run a company and make it more profitable. But we're doing all these things, and we're making the companies more profitable at the same time. And so, it's challenging to execute, but it actually has, like, a real impact. When you think about it, I did a post on LinkedIn, and someone, actually they messaged, like, "Oh, isn't it cute? You think you can actually change the world," or something like that. Kind of a little sarcastic comment. And in my thought about it is, like, what if everybody thought that way? Like, what if everybody, like, tried to make everybody else's, like, life better? Like,
yeah.
what a better world that it would be in. Like, what kind of boss do you want? Do you want the kind of guy that actually, when he walks through the plant and, sees, like, poor working conditions, or sees kind of issue, that wants to address it, that wants to, to make it right, to make it safe for you, so you don't have to worry about coming to work and being injured, or making sure you have enough money that you can go home and you can feed your family, and, and you can do those things, and so it's just sad, that there's, people out there get to the point they think, well, I can't make a difference, so I shouldn't even try, right?
Yeah.
But actually, like, everybody should be, like, trying to do what's right and do what's, make the difference. And for us, we probably have 50, 75,000 people that work at our 150 plus facilities all over the world. And when you think about, that many people, the decisions that Scott and I make and the boards make, we impact those people's daily lives.
Right.
So for those 75,000 people, we are their world. Mm-hmm. Like,
yeah.
we actually make an impact on that. So the decisions that we make actually matter to those people. There's billions of other people in the world that they don't even know who we are, and they don't care,
right.
About what we're doing. But for those people, like, we can impact them. And the same thing in our firm, the employees in our firm. That's why we try to, like, take really good care of the people in our firm, is because, we directly impact their lives. And, neither Scott or I are the kind of people that, are going to say, hey, let's cut their benefits. We could make an extra $1 million this year. We're the opposite. Like, what can we do for the people? How can we, get better health care? How can we, improve the working conditions? Or how can we do, things for our employees that make them more satisfied, that make them, happier? But again, it's all about trying to make a difference in people's lives.
I think it's just amazing. First off, that the bar is so low. in some of these spots to where people literally are just like, hey man, like we just want to come to work and not have our shoes melt. That's one thing. But then being able to turn around and just say, we just want to be treated like human beings. So, I mean, it's amazing to see that you guys operate with the aspect of it's humanity over profit. Sure. Because at the end of the day, the workers that are out on those floors are pulling in the money and producing the products that actually keep the lights on everywhere, that allow, so much of America and the world around to actually function on a day-to-day basis. And I don't think enough people really take the time to think about that. My dad worked in a refinery for 47 years, and COVID hit, and I'll leave them anonymous, but Dad came in one day and they took him up to the main office building and they said, hey, thank you so much, Terry. You've done a great job. Bye. And this just sent him on his way. And it was profit. And of course, a lot of stuff came out later that there was a lot of additional pay for people that they let go because they got more benefits or whatever. And it's just mind blowing, but it's so refreshing to see that there's a new team out in the world that is devoted to helping people, that is devoted to making the world around them a better place and making the lives of the people that work for them so much better. And that is astounding. We're almost out of time, so I do want to ask you this, because you've addressed everything about employee retention and the different struggles that you guys came into whenever you first had these companies, whenever you first purchased them, and we understand now that so many of these workers, shocker, just wanted to be treated like human beings in the first place. Who'd have thought that? But as with all of this, very quickly, where do you see the industry heading in 2023 and beyond? And do you see any potential problems on the horizon that you will have to face this year?
Yeah, I mean, we were already talking about it. We got board meetings coming up with our companies and talking about the challenges that are facing everybody. And so the current environment, you have interest rates are higher, which is, strengthened the dollar against a lot of foreign currencies, which is positive, but that the rising interest rate has had an impact, so that every $10 million of debt that each one of our company has, it's $400,000 to $500,000 of incremental interest expense a year. And when we're doing transactions that are $400 or $500 million or $600 million, and so you have $300 million of debt, so that's an extra $15 million of interest expense. So that's like non-value added, that the cash that the company makes is going out the door just to service the debt on the business. That's a big challenge. We don't put a lot of debt on our companies, which has enabled us to continue to do transactions when a lot of others in the industry haven't been able to do them. But it still has a big impact on our companies. And so we're looking at ways to accelerate paying down that expensive debt. At the companies, we have to get our CEOs to make better decisions and think about how they're allocating capital. Allocating capital, in this market is different. Doing capital projects, you may spend $5 or $6 million or more, depending on your company on capital in a given year for capital improvements, CapEx types of projects. This year, because the cost of capital is so high, you really need to take a sharper view on those things and decide, with a different priority on what you're going to focus on. But the economy is definitely going to be challenging the rest of this year. And then as we go into an election year, I think it's actually going to get worse. So, I think we're in for a couple years of some rocky, things going on in the macro market, especially in North America, in Western Europe as well. But those are two things that we're going to be talking to all of our CEOs about coming up in the board meetings.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about, labor costs and how much the labor costs are increasing, material costs is increasing, freight costs is increasing, and that happened last year too.
Right.
But we were really working with our companies to make sure that they understand what those costs are and how much those costs are increasing, and go have honest conversations with their customers. A lot of management teams just do not generally go to their customers and try to get price increases when they're needed for obvious reasons. I think everybody in the world knows that they should be getting some kind of, increase in price.
Right.
And so we give the management team some tools to realize which customers they're actually making money on, which customers they're not.
Right.
And really sort of, not necessarily directing them as much as freeing them to say, go talk to your customers, show them your situation, show them your costs. They can't look at that and just say, no, sorry, you can't get a price increase. You know what I mean? And so we empower them to have those tough discussions. And actually, we don't even think they're that tough. If you go in an honest way and say, look, this is a business discussion, we're losing money on your parts, and it's because we have to pay our people more, and we have to pay for material, and it's going up, and have an honest conversation with them. A customer that you want to have, a customer that'll work with you in the long term, they understand that, and they'll give you what you need to be able to make money and continue in operation. And if they don't, then that's probably not a customer that you want to partner with anyway.
Yeah.
We empower them. We don't, make them in all instances. Some instances we do, but we empower them that they have the board's authority to go give this price increase, and if they can't get it, to stop shipping if they need to, or whatever they need to do to get that across the finish line. And those costs, they'll continue to rise, and we continue to have to keep our eye on that ball. Otherwise we're losing money.
Well, guys, we're out of time. Thank you both very much for taking the time to come out here on the very first episode of Executive Sessions. It's flown by. I had about 1,000 more questions I wanted to ask you guys, but that's more of a reason for you to come back next time. So thank you all very much to everybody who's watched today for our first episode of Executive Sessions. A big thank you to John Stewart II and Clark Freeman, who are in the back. You can't see them, but they made all of this come to life. And again, thank you very much to John Stewart I and Sir Scott Duncan as well. Join us next month when we're back again on Executive Sessions for more manufacturing insight. Until then, this is the grouper, Clayton. I'll see you next time.